welcome to the Both And podcast, where we use both hemispheres of our brains and our hearts to discuss matters of education, behavioral health, social justice, identity, and anything else that might require a both and perspective. Each week during the show, we check in on these issues and present a challenge to one another and to you in order to ensure our words are met with action. I'm Ben Wilkoff, an anti-racist, equity-focused, growth-oriented husband and father of 3 strange and beautiful children.
And I'm Jessica Raleigh, anti-racist educator, nonprofit entrepreneur, and passionate change maker.
Let's check in on the 2 weeks that we've had, and see what is top of mind. I like the way that you said that earlier. What is top of mind for you?
Going back to school.
Is it? Why
Sure
is that
is.
top of mind for you?
Well, in 2014, Valentine's Day was my last day with students in my 4th grade classroom. And I, as of next Thursday, will have middle school technology students who will be coming physically to my classroom every day, 5 days a week. And I will be teaching them with a mask and lots of sanitation procedures and other very interesting things to think about when setting up a classroom and a school year.
Yes.
It's so weird.
We should think about those things. So it is going to be face to face. I was thinking it was going to be totes virtual, but it is face to face.
So as of right now, I am a long-term substitute. So I will be in person, and the teacher, who is actually a friend of ours, Beth, will be staying home so that she can make sure that her daughter gets some kind of education this year, given the health condition that she has, and that her students, Beth's students, have some kind of education all of the times when her daughter's health condition means that she has a fever. And there's just no way that she's going to be 48 hours fever free for any period of time and be able to go to school. So Beth's going to just be a remote facilitator, and she'll be working with the students who've chosen, so their families could opt in.
Oh, okay.
To
Yeah.
remote. It's a charter school in Douglas County, so they have a lot of autonomy, and they've been able to. Douglas County has had a lot more, like all school districts, has just had so many more complexities to try to figure out. And there's a lot more people in the community with a lot of different needs, of like a wider variety of needs, I would say. And on top of that, they don't have the same infrastructure, the same, FTE, like number of people, adult people, to help all of the things. So it's been really interesting to see the way that this charter school and their autonomy have been able to give their community a choice, online or in person. And so I will be in person with the families and kids who've chosen to be in person, and everything's basically has been and is continuing to be redesigned in terms of like everything's a cohort. So there won't be the same kind of homerooms, and students won't have lockers, so they'll have their backpacks with them at all times. So now there are more safety and security and health and things that we need to think about. And like cell phones won't be locked in lockers, cell phones will be in backpacks. So it's more often that they might go off in class, and so just all the things, all the teacher things, but just kind of to the nth degree right now. I think it's and also ever changing, because at any given time we could all be remote, and at any given time a cohort and the teachers might be all online, but there also are things in place, like for me being a specials teacher, if a cohort that I see has a student who tests positive for COVID and the cohort is then quarantining, it's likely that the homeroom teacher the teachers who've been spending large amounts of time every day with those students in a smaller classroom kind of space would also quarantine with the students. But someone like me, who's a specials teacher, one, if you take every adult out of the building who has walked by or
Right.
spent 5 or 10
That's
minutes with
everybody.
the cohort, you have no more adults left in the building.
Right.
So I don't think that's going to work.
Nope.
But it also kind of depends on things like, if I, as a specials teacher, having seen those kids for 40 minutes, if I can confidently say, all of these students were at least 6 feet away from me. We all were wearing masks. I know for sure every kid used hand sanitizer on the way in. Like, depending on the circumstances, there are a lot of different things. So it's sort of like the flow chart just goes like, and there's all these different if this, if this, if
Right.
this, if
Right.
this. But a lot of it's, I think, going to be changing once it actually happens because these are all hypotheticals based on never doing this before and just hoping that we'll be able to get kids walking through the hallway, staying apart from each other and using the restrooms in safe ways, only one at a time. And yeah.
So you said something just now. We don't know that it's going to work. Do you have a thought as to whether or not it's going to work?
Um, I have been extremely impressed with the people I have met so far who work at this charter school. They actually have 3 campuses, and it's very clear to me that they have been thinking about and working on COVID procedures and having the conversations that they need to have since April. It's very, very obvious to me, painfully obvious, that our school districts and the majority of our public school communities have not been having those communications. They've not been having those discussions about if this and how might we, and it's so obvious that it's been like avoidance and pass the buck and nobody, and what if it's just normal again, and it's just round and round and round. Whereas this school community, since April, leadership has been on it. They've been making sure that they're having the conversations about, like, well, what do our families want? What are our families worried about? What are our teachers worried about? And now, like, going back, this is the first week, staff week for new teachers, and then next week will be
For
all
everybody.
staff
Yeah.
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then middle schoolers come Thursday, Friday, and then elementary will come the following week. So there are a lot of conversations that I think leadership is able now to focus on their staff and
Hmm.
to focus
Hmm.
on this transition and bringing staff back and then preparing staff to bring the rest of the school community back. Whereas other schools right now and their leadership teams are non-existent. Like, if you're a teacher in a classroom and you need to know something about something as piddly as moving a piece of furniture,
Right.
or like what your schedule might be, or like how many children you might have to set your room up for, like those little menial things. Like, which, and I say is because from a leadership point of view right now, like, that is so, so trivial. And
Right.
from a teacher perspective, especially if you're a new teacher or a substitute, you're freaking out not having any of that information. You're feeling stuck, you don't know what to do, who to talk to. And so I just think about all of the dominoes that are happening right now and how it's being felt in those communities because they weren't having those conversations. Whereas this school community, the executive director had a staff town hall. She's been every week taking questions. There's like all these different avenues for communicating and asking, about things that you're concerned about. And she's been making sure to be really transparent while also protecting everybody's privacy. So, like, there's already been one staff member who's tested positive in the last few weeks. And already she's been just continuing to reiterate, like, hey, what I've been saying and what I've been sort of promising as how I'm approaching this, I'm showing you now I actually meant it, and we will continue to do things this way. And so there's a lot less fear in the community, at least that I feel from the staff. And again, I'm only with mostly new staff. So I would imagine that the returning staff next week, there will be a lot of that feeling of just like community and calm and like, yeah, we support each other, kind of a similar thing to this week. So,
That's awesome. I,
yeah.
I mean, that's really great. I mean, that leads us into actually last week's challenge or 2 weeks ago's challenge, thinking about like a list of things that we have to get right. I wonder if you might be able to check off these things that I had written down. So, have they thought through sick leave for employees who do get sick?
Yes.
What does that look like?
However, I do not know what their plan or policy is for long-term substitutes like myself
Okay.
who get sick. I
Yep.
did ask who pays for the COVID test because I'm on Medicaid and I have 0 benefits with them. So
Right.
I
So,
think it's a yes, but not for every single adult who's in the building as an employee.
yep. That was my second thing, testing regularity. So, like, how often are people getting tested in the building?
So nobody comes into the building. I don't need to say it that way. When everybody enters the building, there are thermal cameras,
Uh huh. Yep.
which they've been testing, throughout the last few weeks and during family registration and all that kind of stuff. And in addition to the cameras, they also have like the temperature. What do you call the
Yeah.
forehead? Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, it's a thermometer,
thermometer.
right? Like,
There we
that's,
are.
yeah.
Yeah, words. I don't know. Um, and so they have those. So like if somebody shows on the thermal scanners like a high body temperature, then they can do just on the spot with the thermometer. And then there's also hand sanitizer kind of situations literally everywhere. And all of the doors in the morning, like all of the procedures for carpool and drop off and pick up in the afternoon have been accounted for in terms of like the doors will be open so no one's touching the doors. There will be security at the doors making sure that only children who should be coming in the building are coming in the building. Parents are not allowed in the building for any reason at all, like all those kinds of things. So um yes, they have all of that kind of stuff. And then if there's a situation of exposure, then they have testing and they're working right now to try to, um, I think, like get a contract or something with a company that will do like 48-hour turnaround testing for them, just every employee anytime they need it kind of deal.
That's nice. I like that. So let's say that a kid gets COVID. What
Hmm.
kind of contact tracing happens? Like, you were sort of explaining that a little bit,
Yeah.
from the perspective of, everybody who's in the cohort and things like that. But how does that work?
So, excuse me, they have all the students in cohorts and essentially a cohort's a class. Each class of students stays in their classroom. The students do not travel. The adult travels. There are procedures for what happens every time the adult in the room changes in terms of like students sanitizing in between classes. And then the time that
So
children are
you, as the technology teacher, are traveling as well, or they still come to you?
no, no. They're the students travel 2 times a day. Students travel to lunch and then to their specials. So the adult travels the entire group of children with their backpacks and all their belongings to the specials teacher. And then they're calling it gel in, gel out. Just trying to get
Okay,
the
I like
kids to
that.
get used to, yeah, just like every single time you go in and out of a classroom, and then it's up to the teacher to develop whatever procedures with the kids that you want in terms of like wiping down your area as you walk out, wiping down chairs, like however you want the kids to handle that kind of stuff. So if there's a case, excuse me, what will happen is, like, if a student within that class tests positive, then they have a communication plan for how they communicate to all the people who were potentially exposed. And then they also have a plan for 2 weeks of, like, that cohort is now quarantined. But while that cohort is quarantined, those students and teachers are still engaged in e-learning. uh, and I don't believe that there's a transition period in between. I know some districts are doing like a 2-day in between kind of transition thing, but I think it's just the next day we just go into e-learning.
Okay. And does the schedule is the schedule impacted at all by sort of the difference in the procedures? Like obviously it takes a little longer to get in and out of a classroom, those kinds of things. Does the sort of daily schedule get impacted at all?
I have been in education and have taught long enough to not be paying close attention to the daily schedule yet, because I know that it's going to change a lot, and
Yeah.
whatever's in the little spreadsheet boxes doesn't
It's
actually mean anything.
yeah, sure.
But my understanding so far is that they have not changed their bell schedule, let's
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
But what they have done is sort of started to account for the fact that teachers will be, they're not saying it this way, but teachers are going to lose a lot of instructional time to kids cleaning
Yep.
and teachers cleaning and doing things like, okay, now we're cleaned and everything is sanitized and we've got our backpacks on and we're standing and we're not touching anything, and we're standing there for 4 extra minutes because who the heck knows how long it will actually take
Right.
them
Yeah.
to.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, like, there's all of those kinds of things. And so it seems to me like the priority really is just like, be safe, do the procedure, da, 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 and if and when we do some math, cool beans.
Yeah. Gravy. That's totally gravy if we get to do the math.
No one's
Um,
saying it, but school is very much daycare.
yeah. Yeah. Um, hmm. Are they thinking about like traffic patterns as they go through the school? Have they like marked out like how to walk and things like that?
Yeah, they've taped off in the hallways, and they've got a process for how they plan to have the younger students walking in the boxes and the older students walking on the lines, and having the ability for two classes to pass at the same time. Granted, that accounts for the 3 feet in between children business, but not the 6 feet between adult business
Right.
and caring for the children. But
Yeah. Yeah. We'll
there's
see.
tape on the floor, so.
Right. Well, that's good. That's good. And I'm sure it will stay on the floor for a very long time once the children
Well,
are there.
I think it might at this school because it looks like it's actual fancy, like, this is
Oh,
meant to put on the floor and
it's
walked
not
on
like
kind of
masking
stuff.
tape that most
Yeah, they
schools
have
would probably.
decals also for, like,
Yeah.
things spaced apart and things
Yep.
like that. But I was trying to figure out today in my classroom, I was moving tables around and trying to figure out, like, if I were to tape out and create, like, because what I want to be able to do is essentially have the kids from wherever, from once they come in and get to their seat, if they're at their seat, that there's always a specific pattern and way that a student would leave their seat to go and get materials or to leave the room. And so that way I was trying to keep 3 feet in. It's really hard.
Yeah. No, that
And
definitely
I'm
sounds
apparently
tough.
gonna have, like, 33, 35 kids, middle school kids in some
So
of
there
my.
is no limit to the number of children in the room. I mean, other than it being like a typical class size.
Yeah, I mean, I guess as long as the physical space that you are in accounts for that 3 feet in between 30 something children,
Right.
then no, there's no, like, as part of the COVID planning, and there's nothing about that.
Yeah. Um, the last thing that I had written down that I was really thinking about was actually the communication, which you spoke about a bunch. But is there going to be any kind of like portal or any way for people to know if there is another cohort that is impacted and not like my child's cohort? Um, I just kept on thinking about, I would want to know, how many kids are impacted, in what grade and like those kinds of things, because you can't really publish names, right? Like you can't say this kid had COVID, right? Like that's not a thing that you could send out. But can you? What is the plan for sort of communicating that information?
That's a good question. I know for sure the initial communication plan is focused on communicating with the cohort themselves and not communicating with the cohort until there is a positive test that's been confirmed from the family and the nurse and the. But then there's also, as part of all that, on the sort of back end, leadership also has their whole own plan of how they have to work with in this case, the Tri-County Health Department and school district and all the other officials, because they have a positive and now they need to communicate with them. And now at that point, we're sort of like, um, they are, they have some jurisdiction and to sort of like guide what happens and how it goes down if there's a case. So, like, all of the best laid plans could change because the health department or whoever is, running the show at that point might suggest or, require something different. But I think that it's just the communication in terms of like the regular, like, community and family communications will just have that same level of transparency as the staff will receive, which is in this cohort, there was a positive case. They will be quarantining for 2 weeks and return on blah, blah, blah.
Okay. I mean that sounds like it would that sounds like a lot. But it really does sound like a far more robust response than what I was trying to find lots of things, and we'll probably talk about the inputs and outputs in a minute, but like where people are talking about this, like it really does seem like schools are throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. And like the schools that are doing it poorly essentially are like, there have been a couple of cases where they opened up on Thursday, they closed down on Friday or Saturday, right? Like those kinds of things where it just goes off the rails so quickly because you haven't thought through those extra steps. um, but the other thing that I was really thinking about was essentially like, what are the biggest things that I am looking for my own children, um, and the things that I care about in this year's school. I care about safety overall, like over everything else, which I feel like most parents, that's where they are, right? Like, yes, it is childcare in many ways, but like I am not sending, if I know that there is going to be an issue, I'm not sending my child into that. And I will let you know that Arlo and Isabel will both be doing totally virtual. Right now, we still have Tobias doing a hybrid. Um, and so that to me is going to be valuable for him. But we're still going to weigh that out. It's still like to be determined, because they don't start until the 24th. But safety overall,
Did
engage.
you, sorry,
Sorry.
Ben, did you have to, as a parent, did you have to choose for a certain amount of time when you made that choice? Like, is it getting re-evaluated every so often?
Yeah, I think it's by the quarter.
Okay.
So the first 9 weeks you're deciding for.
Got
Um, so we'll see where we are, at the end of the first quarter. But yeah, so safety, and then the next thing I was thinking about was actually engagement. Like not necessarily like you were talking about total learning, the rigorous curriculum that I might want for my kids, but just that they are engaged in some way with people that care about them. Um, and so I'm hopeful that that is the case. I think the next thing is probably friendship and the connections that are made in school. My children have been desperate for them, and Isabel is going to present to us tomorrow why she thinks she should have a hybrid uh, option, which I got a preview, and it's like I think loneliness is at the top, and then like it makes this cycle all the way around. Like this is gonna happen, and then this is gonna happen, and like clearly it's a guilt trip in another form, but at the same time, like it's not wrong. You know what I mean? Like she is very aware that if I don't see my friends every day, it's going to be worse over here inside of my head. And so like that is a big part of it. I do want them to be challenged in some way, to think and to do different things. That does not require them to be in school, like in a physical place. I want them to have communication, and I want me to have communication, like we were talking about. And then anxiety is like the other one, and I don't know where it fits, but the anxiety that I feel like the kids are going to have if they're taking it seriously. Like if they don't take it seriously, then there probably isn't anxiety, but then actually it's worse. Right? Because they're then not cleaning, they're not, paying attention to what's going on. But like I can't even imagine going to school right now. The anxiety that I would feel for like just walking into that building, like I'm expecting panic attacks. I'm expecting, kids who are, there is always going to be someone who is going to like lick and stick, like who is going to do that. And a kid who is um, anxious already about everything is very likely going to, um, and rightly so, have an issue with that. And so, I just keep on thinking about the mental health of the students, and then the mental health of the adults in the building, right? Like all of these 30 whatever people around me potentially could get me sick enough to put me in the hospital, right? um and there have been a bunch of things, and we can talk about them if you want, but like there have been a bunch of stories around teachers writing their wills, and updating their next of kin kind of stuff, because they don't know what's going to happen. And you never know what's going to happen. You should always have a will, but that's not really the point. um and it just makes me think that you know the the level of support that is going to be needed for folks. So Isabel and probably Arlo School has done some good mental health stuff around like making sure that there are counselors available, sort of at a moment's notice, and things like that. But like that's really tough. And I don't know what you're thinking about that, but that was my list of like, this is what I need for my kids. I can do some of those things from home, right? I can keep my kids safe. I can hopefully keep them engaged. I can, lower the level of anxiety, but I can't probably do the friendship. I can't probably challenge them in the way that a dedicated educator can in all of the various ways that they need and want to be challenged or engaged. Like there are just some things that I'm not going to be able to do. And so it just feels like, I mean, like you said, it's just totally different. It is totally different.
Yes. And this is with the ability for your kids to make, you and your family to make the choices that you feel are continuing to prioritize that list. Like right away, you're saying my number one priority is safety and their health and their wellness. And there are so many families who may have that, probably do have that at the very top of their priority list as well for their families, for their kids. And they don't have any choice but to send their kid to school 2 days a week if that's what their public school's offering, and then daycare the rest of the week, or grandma, or like I know a lot of families who are like all of the kids are opting into um, the e-learning, and then everybody's going to like grandma's every day,
Right.
and grandma is now like
Full-time
watching,
daycare. Yeah.
yep, like watching 5 or 6 grandkids and doing e-school and teaching the kids every day. And I'm just thinking about like all of the things that are going on, and even in that case, the privilege that they have to have a loving adult who's able to be there and caring for and helping the kid. Like there's
That's
just
right.
so many things. And then, depends also on like your school district and your community. Like if you are in Denver, you don't have the choice because you are going to be online all of the time
Right.
until the middle of October. And if you're a family who doesn't have an adult who can be at home with the children, now how many kids are at home alone? How many high school and middle school, even upper elementary kids are now acting as the tutor and the teacher and the daycare provider
The
at
parent.
home?
Yeah.
And so there's just all kinds of layers about that kind of stuff. And thing that I will put out there, it's not based in any, I don't have any actual information yet about how Denver Public Schools made their decision to go online and um, to be full time online through October. But my uh, first thought was something along the lines of the fact that like how many lawsuits they would have if they tried to put kids and teachers with masks into 50-year-old buildings that have no air conditioning, are 4 stories high, and get to be 80, 90 degrees by 11 a.m. consistently every day. And it was only several years ago that the Denver voters and the school districts made the decision to push the whole school year back a few weeks to try to accommodate for the fact that the buildings were so over. And so now, if you then layer on every single fan that they use to keep those temperatures at a balmy 85 instead of 100 something, you
That
can't
is
use those.
just spreading disease.
Yep. Every single one of those fans is not OSHA compliant. It doesn't um, comply with the CDC and any of the regulations for airflow and circulation. You also then have the ventilation, like there is none. A
Right.
lot of
Yeah. I've.
classes don't
I mean,
have
we have both
windows.
been in those buildings. We know what that looks like.
You and I have,
Yeah.
but I wish we all, the citizens who are voting, had been in these buildings,
Yeah.
because I have yet to talk to anybody who is not in education who understands that these are very real things. I'm still talking to people who are like, "Wait, what do you mean you're going back to why are you in school?" And I'm like, "Yeah, you're not hearing the same story
Yeah.
as what's going on. It's the same as everything else. If you're only tuned into the media, you're just getting the media version. You're not getting the real story."
Right. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
Because 4 years ago, people didn't know that our classrooms were 85 degrees.
Right.
So why would someone now, just because of the pandemic, know that?
Yeah. I mean, the story is for sure not being told, and that to me was something that I wanted to make sure that I was trying to listen for and listen to. And um I don't know if you have been trying to intake others. I feel like you've got so much intake from your own experience, but I keep on looking at, okay, so what are the other angles One of which that I am really trying to listen to is the voice of vulnerable populations, like Beth's daughter and other folks who literally, like, there is no way that they could go into a school and feel any kind of safety. Um, and so there is not an option for them other than to do online schooling. And it is it is interesting is not the right word. It is a um, a strange phenomenon that the thing that created interest in online school originally, which was essentially homebound students. That was the first cohort of folks who, did some version of distance learning, was homebound students, and who, immunocompromised or in other ways they couldn't physically, get to the school. And we have changed the degree by which someone needs to be homebound, essentially. Um, but we have said this is what it means to go to school, and we've created some more resources and things like that. But we've either changed the degree, or we've said nope, this is everybody now. And it. I wonder if it is better to say this is everyone now because everyone gets that level playing field. Uh, is it better to go with that route, or is it better to then say, okay, how do we give an equitable uh, educational experience if the only people that have to stay home are those who physically cannot, right? Who have those further complications, or their family does, right? Like if the parent is immunocompromised, it's also not okay for the child to go. And so there are all of these other situations where it's like, well, if this or this or this or this, you shouldn't come to school. And so how do you ensure that that is equitable? And I don't know how to do that. How is your school doing that for the folks who are choosing to stay home? Do they feel like they're going to get the same or a similar enough experience that feels authentic to the moment?
The plan in terms of content and how the students are going to be learning is that whether they are in person or online, they will be receiving the same thing. The people who are, um, for example, the people who are facilitators online for the specials content, it's split up by K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, and you have just one person for each of those grade bands who essentially is facilitating whatever the music teacher created online, whatever the technology created online. And so the content itself is supposed to be the same. Now, the learning experience and the teaching practice that's being used is going to be very different because they are not only different people, but they also are people who are not necessarily tuned in any particular content area that they're necessarily facilitating. They just happened to, I mean, it's sort of a numbers game, honestly, at this point, based on, like you were just saying, if there are staff members who need to stay home, then you now have staff members who are flexing quite a bit potentially in what they're teaching, in order to not, and this is not only just okay, this is what I'm assigning you to be responsible for teaching, but it's an entirely different way of doing it because they're now online. So I think that when you use the word equitable, I instantly am like, well, it's not. I can tell you now it's not. I can tell you back in March it wasn't. It's that it wouldn't be. Like, and I continue to reiterate, like, I'm speaking from the perspective of a long-term substitute at a charter school who has lots of resources and even something like this. This is a 3 campus charter school that's received $1 million in COVID funds. every school district has received these COVID funds, and it's not based on your community. It's not based on anything that is different for this charter school community than for a school district anywhere else. The difference, however, is that even if you just go down the street to Cherry Creek School District, which historically speaking is one of the most well off and stable school districts in the Denver metro area, they now, because they have such a budget shortfall and already have furlough days and all these other things that they're trying to do to make up their regular taxpayer budget shortfall, they now are using COVID funds so that they don't have to have even more furlough days, so that they don't have to cut or do even more pay freezes. Like, they're not using COVID money for COVID. They're using COVID money to literally keep their district afloat, because in the midst of COVID and already being in such a shortfall, there's no way for them not to. And so essentially what's happening is, like, all of those COVID dollars are being spent on buying supplies, as much hand sanitizer and whatever that they can get their hands on and push into classrooms. And then the rest of it is just trying to make up for the budget shortfall, which they were planning to make up for with the bond measure that they now, since COVID happened, scrambled to take off the ballot, because they know that nobody's going to vote yes. And if they put it on the ballot, whether it's voted yes or no, it's their last bond measure ever. So they needed to halt that real fast. So it's like a mess on top of a mess on top
Wait,
of a
it's their
mess.
last bond measure ever because they have maxed out their ability to do bonds. Wow.
Yes, and I'm still trying to find the way to just quickly say it's rule la da 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 in Colorado, because nobody who I've talked to has been able to tell me that. But I have gotten so far as confirming that there is a law in Colorado that a school district or an entity who's going for bond measures can only have a certain number in the lifetime existence of the district.
It's
And this is
it's
the last
not
one.
it's not until those bonds are paid back, because the lifetime of the bond, right, is usually like 30 years. So
Right.
after they pay it back, could they go for another one? You think that it's ever?
My understanding is that in this specific instance, there is no way that another bond could be put on the ballot, at least in the, I'm assuming, very, very long out future.
Right, yeah. All right. Well, there was one more comment that I wanted to get your thoughts on and wanted to talk about. I don't know if you know Joe Herbert at all. Um, uh, he is a former math teacher, um, and he talks a lot about math on Twitter, essentially, right? He said, "Heavy on my heart right now. In person schooling is going to require a lot of policing student bodies and behavior. Some teachers are ready to thrive in that environment. They are not the teachers who should be in classrooms." And, he had a thread about that. Um, and it definitely gave me pause to think about, as having been in schools where people really liked to police, particularly female bodies, was sort of the most typical instance of that. Shorts length, or tank tops and those kinds of things. But this is going to be a completely different level, right? Where you're not wearing a mask, you're not standing far enough apart, all of those kinds of things. Um, and I wonder how you see sort of that policing of behavior and bodies and preferences and those kinds of things. How do we navigate those waters?
I think uh, a lot of I think a lot of where my head goes is that we have been policing, like when you said particularly female bodies, that I generally am like, yeah, but I actually completely disagree. And I think it's usually young Black men who are being policed in our schools from a very, very young age. And then I think secondary to that is, I think, kids who identify with having a high amount of energy, kids who identify as being sort of very physical in nature, or rough and tumble, like enjoying the physicality of their energy. Like, I think a lot of those children are constantly being policed. And I think essentially, if you think about the perfect student, put that box around them, identify what that looks like, what that sounds like, and any child who does not fit into that, they are being policed and they're not engaged. They're not connecting with the other kids or adults in the building as much. Da, 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 da. And so it goes back to a lot of the things that I think about. I think with every issue that's happening right now is like, I just cross my fingers and toes that this will be the thing that gets people to, I don't know, like, that gets people to develop an awareness of what has actually been going on. Because for me, I want to dismantle the compliance and the policing that's happening in our school system and the school to prison pipeline just as much as I want to defund the police and take that money and put it into schools. So, like, taking SROs out of Denver public schools just so that we can say we support defunding the police and not policing children, to me, is still just doing a disservice to our communities. You're not solving the problem. You're just doing something that helps check off a box and get you a certain message in the media. And that to me is still just the exact same thing we've been doing for decades to our kids. And so again, I'm like, please, please, can we become aware? Hopefully. But I thought maybe we'd become aware, or that we had become more aware of the life of a teacher and what was being put on teachers. And there was a very, very short lived amount of time where I felt like the parent community was actually teaming up in support with schools, with teachers, like, oh, we're going to do this together now and not be at odds. And now it seems to me like we're mostly back at odds again, with a lot of families and parents, particularly the ones who have the privilege and ability to do so, saying things like, I need this and I need that, and my kid, my kid, my kid, but never saying anything about the teacher or the school or the staff, or like what they can do to support the community and being able to go back. And that lack of awareness is just really frustrating to me. Like, how can you all of a sudden just be so closed off and back in your own selfish bubble after everything that has been going on in this country? I really don't understand it.
Yeah, I don't know either. I mean, I do think that there is some level of, you know, keeping those around you safe and feeling like you can't do that effectively, and then not being able to get beyond that. But I don't know that that selfishness is actually how that manifests. To me, that's a little bit more of like, I just don't care about other people in in the same way that I care about myself. Um, so yeah, I yeah, I think there is a lot that we can do there. Um, and I think you're absolutely right that the policing of bodies goes far beyond, obviously, the policing of female bodies, and is definitely like, yeah, the one of the interesting ironies of having to wear a mask is that many uh, black and brown boys who have been, uh, you know, accused of covering their faces or covering their heads or things like that are being asked to do that exact thing. Um, and seeing that as uh, you know, how do you have to change your orientation, uh, at least somewhat, in order to be able to say, yes, you need this to stay safe. Please put on the mask. Please, in order to keep me safe, in order to keep yourself safe. But I do think that that's an interesting way of going. Well, I think that for the most part, we have realized that the challenge of the moment is going back to school, is trying to teach and to learn and to parent in this moment. And I think that at least for the next little while, I think like biting off small challenges around, hey, let's not get sick this week, or hey, let's try and find a path through sort of navigating, um, getting our kids back to school, getting back to teaching, and some of those kinds of things. That feels pretty important to me as a challenge. I don't think that we need to exercise that further. But I wonder if you have any thoughts around that.
Sounds good to me.
All right. So let's, at the very least, do some check-ins on whether or not we are able to safely go back to school as an educator, safely send children back to school, and to try and find ways of checking off our list.
You're Ben, and I'm Jessica, and we've really enjoyed finding the both and perspective as we've talked about our lives, families, and the people and things that are important to us.
If you would like to add your own both and perspective, or just view the full show notes for this episode online, you can find it at bothandpod.com/12. And if you have questions, or you just want to tell us that you like the show, you can let us know at feedback@bothandpod.com, or by leaving a review wherever you've heard this podcast. Thank you so much for watching or listening. We will see you again next week.